Can you see that? Okay, so did Shakespeare really exist? Let's take a few moments here. Alright, so did Shakespeare really exist? This is his epitaph on his grave at the church in Stratford, and it says, "Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear, to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man who spares these stones, and cursed be he who moves my bones." So he put a curse on his epitaph, so if anyone disturbs his grave, they'll have a curse on him, and he's buried 20 feet below the altar in the Holy Trinity Church in Stratford, so that no one can rob his grave. And this was really exciting, because as I was walking down the streets here in Stratford, it suddenly occurred to me, this is the street where Shakespeare once walked, and I'm walking on the street where Shakespeare once walked. And he's this guy that we'd studied since high school, you know. We'd done Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth and all those plays through high school, and as well in theatre school. And this is his little schoolhouse that he went to school in, and it's a one-room schoolhouse, and the class sizes were really small, so there was probably maybe only 12 kids in a class, that kind of thing, because it was all one room kind of. And the major courses they did were like English literature and Latin, and he wrote plays and performed them in the school and in the courtyard and in behind the school. And he also did music recitals here at the church. This church was part of the school, so they performed musically in the church as well. And you can see that there's an artist's rendition of Shakespeare. There's many portraits of him. This is Shakespeare's parents' house. Shakespeare got married when he was 18 years old to a woman by the name of Anne Hathaway. She was 8 years older than Shakespeare, so she was 26 years old, and she was already pregnant for Shakespeare before they got married. And they lived in Shakespeare's parents' house right here. And they had their first daughter 6 months later after they were married. Her name was Susanna. And 2 years after that, they had a set of twins named Hamnet and Judith. Hamnet died when he was 11 of the plague. And people often think that that's why he named Hamlet in his play after his son, who died. And his other daughter, Judith, married a bar owner, but just before their wedding it was discovered that he had another woman impregnated. But she married him anyway, and it was a huge scandal. And I'll get into Shakespeare's feelings on this a little bit later. So this was the home that Susanna lived in with her husband. He was a prominent doctor in the town of Stratford. Shakespeare was very proud of the fact that his daughter had captured this doctor, and he actually, in his will, he made them the executors of his will. Now, poor Judith, after marrying the bar owner, impregnated another woman. This is the church here in Stratford, where all of Shakespeare and his family are buried at the altar. So it's Shakespeare, his wife Anne Hathaway, his son Hamnet, and his daughter Susanna are all buried at the altar in this church. However, Judith was not buried with the family. She was buried outside of the church, and her grave was lost. So I guess Shakespeare disowned his own daughter. And this is the Globe Theatre in London, where Shakespeare spent much of his time. I'm not sure, it's kind of speculated he wasn't really too much in love with his wife, so he spent most of his years in London away from her, and he only came in to visit her like once a year. So he's credited with writing 38 plays. He started writing romance and comedy, and then in his later years he moved into tragedy, and then after that, romantic comedy. He had a theatre company called Lord Chamberlain's Men, which later became the King's Players. And with the 38 plays that he wrote, he also wrote 154 sonnets. In those sonnets, he refers to somebody as the Dark Lady, and it's speculated that that was the woman he was having an affair with. And there's also somebody who they think that he had a legitimate son, an illegitimate son with, as well. So he also has a son by another woman. And many of the sonnets actually spoke about a young male lover that he had, who was much younger than him. So it's rumored that Shakespeare was also bisexual. So we'll never know, really, as to who Shakespeare really loved, and we'll never know why he disowned his daughter, and we'll never know whether or not he wrote the 38 plays or not, because some people believe that Ben Jonson, his contemporary, wrote the 38 plays, and others speculate that a lot of times what actors did was they rewrote the parts themselves. So some people think that the actors revised all of the parts themselves, and then Shakespeare rewrote the whole thing based on their performances. And so we'll never know whether or not he wrote the plays himself. But one thing we do know is that Shakespeare really did exist, because there's records with his baptism, his marriage, his death, his birth, that type of thing. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that if you have a chance to go to England, I highly recommend visiting Stratford and seeing the plays done by the Royal Shakespeare Company on the stage at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. We saw 3 plays while we were there: The Merchant of Venice, and we saw Romeo and Juliet. It was played by a black man and a large Amazon woman, so I had hope for myself to play Juliet after I'd seen that. And we also saw Twelfth Night, which was really fun. So it's a really unique, very beautiful village, and you really get a feeling for Shakespeare's life when you go there, and it's very exciting. So, thank you.